everyone, and welcome back. My name's Rachel,
And I'm Andrew.
and together we are Picture the Scene podcast. Now, if you didn't listen to part 1 of our Chloe Maria May episode, I would strongly recommend going back and listening to that first, because this episode follows directly on it, and you'll definitely need that one for context. But for those of you that did listen to part 1, thanks and welcome back. Now let's do a quick recap of where we left off. In July 2023, a 21-year-old pregnant woman named Chloe Maria May was living in a hotel in Loughborough, Leicestershire. She was in an abusive relationship with a man 21 years her senior, and after weeks of disruption and aggression, the hotel evicted her and her partner. According to her later account, her partner had pressured her, threatened her even, to make a false allegation of rape against 3 people at the hotel. Now, today, we're not going to go into too much detail around that, so whilst there is still a trigger warning, we're not going into the detail we went into in the last episode, so yeah, just a heads up there. Chloe had made a false allegation of rape against 3 people at the hotel. 1 female staff member and 2 male residents. Desperate, trapped, and in crisis, Chloe then made an elaborate 143-minute allegation to the police, claiming she'd been gang raped in graphic detail. The police investigated thoroughly. They arrested all 3 suspects. They searched rooms, seized evidence, conducted forensic testing. But as the investigation progressed, it became clear that Chloe's account just didn't hold up. CCTV showed the suspect's movements. Alibis were corroborated. DNA evidence from the alleged crime scene showed no trace of Chloe. By September 2023, the investigation was closed as a no crime. But Chloe did not accept this. And when arrested as a suspect in November 23, she maintained her story was true. Until finally, in August 2025, she was charged with perverting the course of justice. Now, obviously that was a recap of episode 1. So in part 2, we're going to move from the investigation to the aftermath. We'll hear from 3 innocent people Chloe accused, and we'll understand the devastating impact of her false allegation had on their lives. We will also see how the courts grappled with a genuinely difficult question. How do you sentence a vulnerable young woman for a wicked crime when she's also a victim of her own circumstances? So we need to talk about the impact. Yeah, so tough, Andy. And we had touched on it very lightly in last week's intro, hadn't we? We fully back our justice system in the UK, and to a certain extent it serves its purpose and acts fairly with the evidence presented. But when you see a case with so many grey areas, it becomes really difficult to put yourself in those shoes of the judge and the courts, and, you know, how you behave on a case-by-case basis. It's just really must be really tricky to navigate.
Definitely.
So today we'll talk about the impact, because this is the part that gets overlooked when we focus on the legal mechanisms of a case. And also, it's very easy to overlook the impact this had on the 3 victims who were the accused last week. C1, the female member of staff, we told you she was arrested in the middle of the night. That was 2 a.m. in the morning in front of her 16-year-old child. The trauma of that arrest, of being taken into custody, of being questioned about a horrific allegation that she has no knowledge of, that must be truly devastating. In her witness statement, she described being unable to leave the house. She went on to develop nightmares. She was always on edge, always scared, and she was unable to return to work. So eventually she lost her job, and these are why witness statements are so important. Victim impact statements, they go on to explain like the ins and outs of the repercussions of that crime has had on your life. The impact on her mental health was so severe that her marriage broke down. She had to leave the area that she lived in and try to build a new life elsewhere, and suffered panic attacks as a result of this.
So, just imagine, just let me jump in there. So, she had a mental health breakdown. She lost her job. Her marriage broke down. This is like all because someone was unhappy that they'd been told to leave a hotel because they kept smashing up the room.
Yeah. And like you said, you know, this all isn't ironed out in a matter of hours or days. This takes months, weeks, months, years to investigate properly, diligently. Like, accusations of rape are not taken lightly. And, you know, even when I don't know, say for instance, the newspapers have reported that or the news has reported that someone is being investigated on serious allegations. That newspaper, that news team, whatever, they can report in the days, weeks, months afterwards that that person, is innocent or, that they have a rebuttal to make from whatever went in those press articles. Damage is done at that point though. People will believe what they've heard, especially the juicy version of it, and that's what has the impact on the victims. And like you say, like marriage breakdown, moving out of the place that the person's lived, family impact, trauma on the daughter, panic attacks, no, like lost her job, all of that. That's all. Any one of those things is life changing, but all at once.
Definitely, definitely.
Even days before Chloe's sentencing hearing, which let's remind you that's in 2025, Ewan's 6-year-old daughter, on seeing a police car turning into their estate, became hysterical. She thought at that point that the police were coming to arrest her mother again. C1, in her impact statement to the court, said, "The whole ordeal is still raw. She lives it every day." And she's talking about her 6-year-old daughter in that respect. 2 years after
Yes.
the crime, still reliving that moment.
And just think as well, her daughter that's not even a daughter that saw it happen. So how did this impact the daughter that saw her mum get arrested? And the police are not like soft and gentle when they arrest you, are they? Especially for something like this.
I can
But yeah,
imagine the door was broken down and they were told, "Police, hands up." Yeah, screaming, in their face, which is what the police have to do when they're going to arrest somebody that's seen as a danger. So if you remember C2, he's the male resident. He was already struggling with his mental health when this happened. When he was waiting to be interviewed by police, so when he was still under suspicion of the rape, his anxiety hit the roof, in his own words. He was worried about his daughter, whether or not he'd be ever able to see her again. He was worried about his life being destroyed. And during that 2-month investigation, he struggled to cope. He was unable to work. He was unable to leave the house for fear of being looked upon with shame. And he described those months as hell. He also had pre existing struggles with his mental health, as we've explained, and alcohol abuse, but he'd been working on the problem. After this false allegation, though, he had started to drink more heavily. He'd started to use drugs as a coping mechanism, and he was prescribed medication for severe anxiety. In his impact statement, he simply said, "I felt I did not want to be alive." Because of his inability to work, he struggled financially. His life had been upended by a false allegation made by a young pregnant woman who had been in a situation of genuine vulnerability. So I guess, like, we've put that in because, the police had to respond accordingly. They had to do what they did and put these people under their suspicion. Their hands were tied almost. But as a result, C2, again, his life's crumbled, hasn't it?
yeah, because yeah, you also have to think he lived at the hotel, so he couldn't work, which meant the place he knew as home, he couldn't live either. Because they're not gonna like just stay there for free, are they? So, and then obviously you got all the other things such as his addiction and his anxiety. It's just all just gonna be like it's like, for want of a better word, like compound interest on top of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we haven't kind of touched on this, but I'm sure they weren't allowed to return to the hotel, like within those days, weeks, months after, So actually, not only are you under investigation, but you can't return. We can make sure that your things are collected, but he was probably made homeless after this for a period of time, which the whole thing's so tragic. C3 also gave an impact statement, though details are less extensively recorded, but he too was arrested, detained, and investigated for the rape, as we explained last week. His life was disrupted, and his reputation was massively affected. Just want to kind of underline this before we move on. These 3 people had done nothing. They are innocent. They were innocent the whole time, but they have been fully traumatized by an allegation that was entirely false. And for goodness sake, when we heard the statement from one of these victims last week, they hadn't even come across Chloe and her partner until the day of and after the alleged rape. So Chloe and her partner had only come into their lives as a byproduct of the story being created. It's just not
Yeah.
fair.
And just to reiterate, we're not the type of podcast who would take one side over another. There was irrefutable proof that these people did not do this. If there was any doubt, we would not have touched this at all, would we, Rach? Because we're not one to say our opinion is this. It's pure fact.
Yeah, and I can also only imagine that the police only go on to prosecute for false allegations where there is rock solid evidence, because
Yes.
otherwise they are not going to lend themselves in great light, are they? If they are turning the accusation on its head with any grey areas.
So here's something, Rach, that strikes me as really problematic in this case. And I think you've touched on it already, but there was a delay in charging Chloe. So she made this allegation in July 2023. The police investigation concluded in September 2023, but Chloe wasn't charged with reverting the course of justice until August the 15th, 2025. That's 22 months later. 22
The
months. No, carry on.
Are the CPS challenging continuously, we need this evidence potentially, and I don't this is where obviously my expertise isn't too great, but are they having to create the narrative around the purpose and the circumstances of Chloe and her partner at that time? I mean, I hope to God at some point that he was looked into as well and charged. But are they having to pull together a huge amount of evidence, circumstantial evidence, in the lead up to this allegation that helps build that picture to get that successful conviction for Chloe as well?
Yeah, it could have been, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, it could have been. But once the case did go to court, it moved quite quickly through the courts. Their first appearance at Magistrates Court was on September the 12th, 2025. She was then sent for trial, which is normal at Crown Court. And just to explain, actually, I'll explain this a little bit. When someone goes to Magistrates Court, if the magistrates feel that a custodial sentence is possible or inevitable, sorry, then they will, if found guilty, then they will send it to trial for Crown Court. That's how it works. So if they feel like if guilt is found, it's definitely going to be, or inevitable, it could be a custodial sentence, then it goes to Crown Court.
And
So
so And so just to make it clear for our listeners that perhaps aren't UK based, she has pled innocent. Well, in fact, I think this is the same across the world, is it not? If she had said at this stage, I accept the charges, I'm guilty of perverting the course of justice, it doesn't go to any court. It goes straight for the sentencing. But, 22 months later, she's still pleading innocence at this stage, right?
possibly she might have gone, to be fair, we don't know, but she might have gone no plea. What happens sometimes at Crown Court is you go at magistrates, if your sister tells you that it's going to go to Crown Court or it could go to Crown Court, you go no plea. So she could have gone no plea.
But
But yeah,
still, she's not learnt the error of her ways at this stage, is kind of the point that I'm making. She's still
yeah.
hedging her
She
bets,
didn't say
right?
guilty. Yeah, she didn't
Yeah.
say guilty. She could have gone guilty, and they could have then, in theory, dealt with it if they wanted to. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, you're right there. Yeah, so she was sent for trial at Crown Court, and on October the 27th, 2025, at the plea and trial preparation hearing, that's when she pled guilty. So pleading guilty at that stage, it earned a 25% reduction in sentence. That's just an automatic reduction in sentence for anyone who pleads guilty at that stage. So before we get to the sentencing, I think we need to talk about Chloe's background a little bit, because the court considered it for her sentencing. So it's important context for understanding how we've ended up here. So Chloe was 21 when she made the allegation, and she was pregnant. She was in an abusive relationship with a man 21 years her senior. And according to her own account, and this account was accepted by the court, so we can take that as being truthful, the relationship was not just unhappy, it was also abusive. He was controlling, he was aggressive, and she feared him. She told probation officers that her partner had pressured her to make the false allegation. She said he'd threatened to kill her if she didn't comply. She was feeling trapped and distressed. So that's why she smashed up the hotel room and written a suicide note, because she believed in her state of mind at that moment that that was the only way to escape the situation. She said that when she first saw the police, her first instinct was just to run, and she didn't want to make the allegation. But she said that her partner forced her to do it. Later, when she was arrested as a suspect, she denied that her partner had forced her because she was afraid she'd be sent to prison and was frightened of what he might do if she admitted the allegation was false. After the allegation, she and her partner ended up living in dire conditions in Skegness in an abandoned house with no running water. And remember, she was pregnant this time and she was desperate. So she phoned her mother in desperation. Her mum drove from Leicestershire to Skegness to rescue her. And that's how she ended up escaping that relationship. And she said that she hasn't contacted her ex-partner since. And just to answer your question, no, he was never arrested or anything like that. But she she hasn't contacted her ex-partner since. Though he has posted messages on Facebook wishing harm on their daughter.
Wow.
And their daughter was born whilst Chloe was undergoing this ordeal. And their daughter is now 18 months old.
So, am I right if I could just take a step back in suggesting that Chloe's partner has forced her into calling the police to make a false allegation because they don't want to get kicked out of the hotel? She has, in an uncontrollable fit of rage or anxiety or something, she has trashed her hotel room. Was that purposeful to bring the police to the premises and then trigger the whole process? Or was that in a moment of madness where she's like, everything's out of my control, I'm gonna trash a hotel room, and then the police turn up and she's like, "Oh shit, I need to run. I don't want to get wrapped up in false allegations." Like, and I know we can't answer it, but I do just wonder how in control in that moment was she? Was it a thought through process? Let's trash the hotel room, get the police here. Because if I call up crying, they might ask why I didn't call up 2 days ago. You know, all of these questions that I can't answer will be resolved through this act of disruption? Or has she trashed the hotel room genuinely worried, concerned, and then when the police have come, gone, oh shit, I better go down the route of the rape because otherwise not only are we going to get evicted, but we'll be charged on criminal damages now. I wouldn't.
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, we can't answer that question, but
No.
it's definitely a possibility, isn't it?
Yeah, and even if she did answer the question, like, would we ever get to the bottom of it? Who knows? But it's just one of those things where, and I guess this aligns to how premeditated it was. Like, yeah, you and I will never know.
We won't. The pre-sentence report noted that Chloe is now a good mother, which is always good to hear. She was using cocaine throughout the abusive relationship, but she hasn't used it since leaving that relationship. She's living in Leicestershire, close to her parents and her family. She's stable, she's remorseful, having left the abusive situation, and she's now assessed at being at a low risk of reoffending. A psychiatric report indicated that Chloe had suffered from mixed depressive and anxiety disorder for many years, ever since her school days, and this would have been enhanced by her cocaine use at the time and by her fear of her partner. But here's the complexity though, Rach. Chloe was a vulnerable young woman in an abusive relationship when she did this, but she was also old enough to understand that making a false rape allegation was such an obviously wicked thing to do. That was actually the words of her sentencing judge. So it's not my opinion, that's the words of the judge that sentenced her. So she was old enough to know the consequences for the people that she was accusing.
Yeah, and I feel like there has to be a line in the sand of not that you can be forgiven if you're a child or you're a youth, under the adult age, but a moment where you need to take into account, okay, the brain hasn't fully developed, isn't capable of defining risk versus reality. Reality versus fantasy, or, whatever you want to call it. But absolutely, 21-year-old woman, old enough to have left home, carry herself, secure this job, this work, cleaning, and make decisions and take actions based on her own merit. I'm sure there were plenty of times where she could have confided in with female officers about the situation that she was in. Absolutely. I can't imagine how she must feel, but the fear that she has explained in some of her notes around, what might have happened to her if she came clean, that looming must be awful. But we know it from episodes that we've done in the past. There are so many women and men that are in these situations everywhere, and, these abusive relationships, controlling, coercive control, that happen on a day-to-day basis, that do not commit the crimes that Chloe has been accused of here. So at what point does she become culpable for those actions, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make.
Great question.
Chloe was sentenced on December the 8th, 2025, so that's only 2 months ago, at Leicester Crown Court by His Honour Judge Harbridge KC. The judge's opening remarks set the tone. He said rape is a very serious offence. One of the most serious that there is. A false allegation of rape against somebody else is also very serious of an allegation to make. It is a truly wicked thing to do. To make such an allegation against 3 people allegedly acting together to hold you down whilst that offence is committed is extremely serious. He continued, against anybody, whether male or female, is one of the worst things a woman could do, even if you are put up to it by someone else. It is such obviously a wicked thing to do that you must have realised that at the time. The judge described Chloe's 143-minute ABE interview as a truly awful lie. He noted that while she was arrested in November 2023, instead of acknowledging that it was all a lie, she went on to maintain her story. She showed, and these are his words, no remorse and no empathy with her victims for what she had put them through. The judge then considered the Sentencing Council guidelines for perverting the course of justice. Guideline assesses cases on 2 dimensions. 1, culpability, and 2, harm. On culpability, there were several high culpability factors. The conduct was sustained over a long period of time. Not a single false statement, but an ongoing, detailed lie. There was planning involved, or at least organisation by her partner with her participation. And the underlying offence, being perverted, was extremely serious. Rape. The judge also acknowledged some lower culpability factors. Chloe was in an abusive relationship. She obviously, as we've alluded to, had difficulties with her mental health, and she was put under pressure to make the allegation. That pressure and coercion, the judge accepted, didn't excuse what she did, but it did reduce her culpability. Balancing these factors, the judge concluded that the case should be treated as Category 1B, medium culpability with very serious harm. The starting point for a Category 1B offence under the guidelines is 2 years custody, with a range of up to 4 years. The judge went on to consider mitigating factors, character references from her family, her remorse now that she'd left the abusive relationship, her role as a good mother to an 18-month-old daughter, and he also referred to the psychiatric report, noting no mental illness as such. Whilst the depression and the anxiety were serious, it was not a diagnosed illness that removed the responsibility. He noted that there were 3 victims, which aggravated the seriousness. This multiplied the harm. And here's the crucial moment. The judge considered whether the sentence could be suspended. This had been the thrust of the mitigation advanced on Chloe's behalf. The defence argued that the impact on her young child and the separation of mother from child and the family hardship meant that a custodial sentence could be disproportionate. The judge said that he'd considered that very anxiously indeed. He noted that all but one of the factors in the imposition guidelines were in her favour, including a realistic prospect of rehabilitation and an absence of risk. But the one factor against suspension was overwhelming. Again, his words. The seriousness of the offence meant the appropriate punishment could only be achieved by immediate custody. The judge concluded, I go back to where I started. Rape is a very serious offence, and a false allegation of rape is also very serious. It is especially serious when you make it against 3 people. Nobody wants to part a mother from her child, but I'm afraid that this is so serious that I cannot suspend the sentence. With a 25% credit for her guilty plea, the sentence came to 18 months imprisonment, and a restraining order was also made.
I said just to add a little bit of extra context to that, she wasn't on remand while waiting for the sentencing, so that 18-month, she'd serve 2/3 of that would start on the 8th of December, so she is still in prison right now.
And can I just say something that I think a lot of mothers and fathers, parents of the listeners, the parent population of our listeners will be thinking, that's double the life of the age of her daughter that she's been sentenced for. And obviously you have just made the comment that she'll face 2/3 of that. For good behaviour, she'll be out before the 18-month period. But say for argument's sake, one slip up, by the time she's eligible for release, her daughter will be 3. So that is a huge leap, and all parents will know in that little child's lifetime, all because of a lie. And like the unnecessary fabrication and the impact and just one more thing, that obviously that was a very detailed sentencing note that we shared that focused purely on Chloe, rightly so. They didn't allude to the victims in the comments that we shared there. They have a lifetime of rehabilitation work ahead of them. They're never going to overcome easily. If they were named in the press after this, whether or not on purpose, by accident, whatever, that will take a long, long, long time to overcome. And the fact that Chloe has been sentenced will give them some form of comfort, because no sentence in that case would have just felt like added insult to injury, I feel.
But Chloe did appeal though, Rach. Her sole ground of appeal was that the sentence should have been suspended because of the impact on her 18-month-old daughter, as you've just said, and the implications for her family support network. So because this was a short sentence, unlike appeals which can take a long time, this appeal was actually heard on the 19th of December last year, 2025, before the Court of Appeal, Criminal Division. Now, Lord Justice Miles, who is male, Sir Robin Spencer, who is male, and I mention the genders because some people go, well, the judge was male, the appeal judge was male, so they don't understand. But also the third appeal judge was Her Honour Judge Monroe KC. So there was both genders considering this. Then they considered the case. The circumstances of her family at the time of appeal, they were quite harrowing. Her mother and father, Chloe's parents, so the grandparents of that little girl, they're both in their 50s and they're still working full time. But they're now the full time carers for Chloe's daughter since she went into prison. So this is causing significant difficulties for them both. They've both been unable to return to work, and the child has been increasingly clingy with her grandmother, as you'd expect, wouldn't you, Rach? Like, where's my mummy gone? Is it the obvious question?
I actually have 2 children of similar ages to both one of the children that were impacted in victim one's case, C1, and of Chloe's child as well, and putting myself in the shoes of, how I'm experiencing that clinginess right now with the age development anyway, breaks my heart. But also for the victim, C1, to have a child who's got this anxiety and fear for the loss of her mother, potentially by the police, also breaks my heart. So really conflicted there, but you're absolutely right. Like, that child having not getting to see her mum every day it's going to be such a difficult adjustment for her.
So the grandmother, Chloe's mum, works as a post office manager, and she was in a probationary period at the time of the appeal. And she was worried she would lose her job if she had to stay at home caring for the child. By the time of the appeal, she had been signed off sick. The grandfather, so Chloe's dad, also works full time, but didn't feel able to return to work. Now, so both would have struggled financially if Chloe was imprisoned, particularly with the additional cost of a small child. But here's something that also came up at the appeal. The grandmother stated that if the appeal was dismissed and Chloe remained in custody, that she simply would just not return to work. And if necessary, she would resign from her job in order to continue looking after the child for as long as necessary. So these are, as you said, Rachel, these are real human consequences. Not just for Chloe in prison, but for Chloe's family as well. It was a family falling apart. A grandparent sacrificing her career, her new career that she'd only just got, and a child growing up with a mother in prison. And the appeal court, they acknowledge this. They were also aware of the consequences of immediate custody for Chloe's child and the additional burden falling on her parents and other family members involved in their care. But they also cited case law. They referenced R versus Fervey, a case about perverting the course of justice, which established that conduct which tends and is intended to pervert the course of justice strikes at the heart of the administration of justice and also invariably calls for a custodial sentence. It's important for our listeners to understand that that's what appeal judges will do when people are appealing a sentence, not an actual conviction. They'll see, well, what has happened before? Has there been any other cases? And is there room for manoeuvre on this one?
And also, it can work both ways. Through doing the review of other cases and their sentencing, it can actually work against the favour of the
Yeah.
person. And, sentences can be increased, can't they?
They can, and we've heard that before, they definitely can. And the appeal court, they also cited R.V. Graham, which held overall the general trend of authorities is that in cases of perverting the course of justice, an immediate custodial sentence is almost invariably to be imposed, which is why the magistrate court would have sent it to Crown Court in the first place. Although the language does sometimes vary from case to case, that is the gist of all the authorities. So accordingly, there needs to be a high degree of exceptionality if an immediate custodial sentence is not to be imposed for such offending.
And that's the thing, right? Not that it should be publicised as this, but these sentences and these cases are being sent to court and being given custodial sentences in the case of very serious allegations, false allegations, and perverting the course of justice because they need to send a message out to the rest of, I was going to say the land, which is very oldie worldy, isn't it? But, you cannot do this and get away with it. There will be serious implications if you lie to police, to emergency services staff. Like, you tell the truth. You do not waste police time. You do not lie to benefit yourself or those around you. And these cases of with custodial sentences really hammer that home, don't they?
Definitely. And the appeal court distinguished Chloe's case from the first one I mentioned, Feve, noting that in that case, the offender had only told one lie about an alibi in a murder case. And by contrast, Chloe had maintained her elaborate lies throughout her very lengthy ABE interview. A great deal of valuable police time was wasted, and above all, the impact on her victims was incalculable, which is what you've already mentioned earlier. And the appeal court also said there were multiple level A. So the appeal court also saw level A high culpability factors. Firstly, conduct over a sustained period, the planned nature of the conduct, and the seriousness of the underlying offence. So the appeal court also referenced a principle from R. versus Preverick, which stated it also needs to be remembered that just as a sentence may affect the family life of the defendant and of his or her innocent family, so the crime will very often have involved the infringement of other people's family life, which you so well put earlier. And so the appeal court then observed that the present case is all too sadly a classic example of that proposition, having regard to the devastating impact of the offence upon the family life of the victim C1 in particular, as you said, with her child and her children. So the appeal court concluded, for all these reasons, we are satisfied that the applicant's sentence was neither wrong in principle nor manifestly excessive, and the application for leave, so an application for appeal, is refused. So Chloe's appeal was dismissed and she remains in prison right now.
Wow. So where does this leave us? This case sits at an intersection of some genuinely difficult questions. We have a young woman who is genuinely vulnerable, abused, pregnant, and mentally unwell. We have real factors that explain, at least in part, why she did what she did. And yet we also have three innocent people whose lives were devastated by her actions. We have a justice system that has to balance punishment, deterrence, and the protection of victims and the welfare of their dependents. Courts decided that the seriousness of perverting the course of justice, especially when it involves false rape allegations against multiple people, demands immediate custody. Almost invariably, though, the impact on Chloe's child, real as it is, cannot override the need to punish conduct that strikes at the heart of the administration of justice. And here's why that matters. False allegations of rape are rare. The statistics are clear on that. Genuine victims of sexual assault need to be believed and supported. But when an allegation is false, and when it is maintained through a lengthy interview and beyond that, and when it causes the kind of trauma that C1, C2, and C3 all experienced, the justice system has to respond with those real consequences. Because if it doesn't, and if suspended sentences are imposed for false rape allegations, what message does that send?
Exactly.
And this is the thing, right? Can you put three innocent people through a criminal investigation? And I'm putting words in their mouth, but essentially we believe that it's caused them PTSD. It's definitely caused them to lose jobs, panic attacks, suicidal ideation. So we've heard in witness statement or in victim impact statements, and then allow the person to walk free that's caused all of that When? Because they're a parent to a child, but your children have sacrificed, and then walk free to parent your child because your parents are having to sacrifice their careers. That's the balance that doesn't really weigh up, does it?
It doesn't know. I agree completely with you. If it real we all know how difficult it is for a rape conviction to be upheld, to actually happen. Like we know that there are far more people who get raped who are brave enough to go and report it, and nothing ever happens of it, either for lack of evidence, lack of ability, or of the police, or for whatever reason. So if someone is making this up, it makes it even harder for those people.
Yeah.
And if yeah, it has to be punished, unfortunately. It has to be
No, you're so
punished.
right. However, what I will say is that we can simultaneously hold on to the knowledge that Chloe was a victim here. We know that. She was a victim of her abusive partner. She was a victim of her own mental health struggles and a victim of the circumstances that she was in at that moment. But as the law and the Court of Appeal has found, you've kind of got to sit with that complexity and say, yeah, I understand you are a vulnerable person, but this offence is too serious. So there's no neat conclusion here, I guess, is what we're saying. There's just the recognition that sometimes harm is done all around, and the system has done its best and does its best to hold people accountable while also recognizing their humanity.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about that case?
I just think it's sad. I think it's avoidable. I think you alluded to it. I don't think it could happen, sadly, but it feels like the partner needs to be punished for this too. But sadly, he's not the one who made the accusation of rape. There's no like, I know he was abusive and everything, and the court accepts that. But again, like, then it goes down to the court accepting it and then enough proof for a conviction or even an arrest. So like it feels like the partner needs to be as much punishment or more than Chloe, but it's just never going to happen. And it's just sad. Like Chloe's daughter, it's just another child that's been affected by this, as well as the like we know C1 had at least two children. She may have had more. I don't know. C2 had at least one daughter because it mentioned it. We don't know if he had any more. We don't know about C3. So that's at least four children in this affected. Not even talking about the adults. So it's just sad. I think it's just really sad.
It is sad, and it's also incredibly difficult to sit here again talking about a case that's so unnecessary, isn't it? Like, at the end of the day, none of this was necessary. And it's, another example of the judge used the term wicked, just people's wicked intentions. And as you say, there's an individual here that gets off scot-free without suffering any consequences for his actions because he's allowed somebody else to, be his puppet and do all the doing. It's just unfair for everyone.
Or is Not only is it unfair, you got to remember December last year, or less than what's my maths like 2 months ago, roughly, give or take. He was still on Facebook wishing harm on his own daughter. Craziness, but yeah, I don't. This is a sad case. But I think we have to identify and highlight all different types, so we can show not only the justice system at work, but just what happens in society.
Yeah, and I do think that what I particularly like about the cases that we bring forward are that they highlight, the nuances in certainly in the jurisdictions that we write about our cases in, of the courts, of the police, of the processes, of, the law as well. So there's always an educational piece as well as a criminal perspective, isn't there, with us? So thank you very much for bringing this one to us. It's definitely not a case that I had heard of, even though it was only in the news 2 months ago. Really painful to listen and speak about, but really interesting as well. So thanks, Andy.
But that's a sad thing. It didn't really make the news. Not the her conviction and appeal anyway. The original allegations did, but as you said, alluded to before, but her conviction and appeal didn't. Shall I wrap this one up then, Rach?
Can I just say on that, rightly or wrongly, it didn't make the news? Like, do we want to tell people that there are people out there that falsely allege that rapes occur? Do you know what I mean? I wonder
Okay. Yeah.
tactfully whether, I mean, not that, you know, let's be honest, she probably hasn't made the news because there are certain things sensationalized that this case can't be sensationalized about, right? So it's not juicy headline grabbing for the newspapers. But I wonder whether that is actually a good thing that, there isn't knowledge out there that's shared about the wickedness of this.
Yeah. That is I guess that is I mean, if it was more prevalent, then it probably should need to be to stop more
Yeah.
people, but it's very rare that people actually make false allegations. So, yeah, I guess you're right there. So then, if it's safe for you to do so, I'd like you to relax. Close your eyes and picture the scene. A young woman in custody, her daughter, 18 months old, learning to navigate a world where a mother just isn't there. Her parents, aging, giving up their careers to hold a family together. Three people trying to rebuild their lives after being accused of the worst crime imaginable and being found innocent, only to discover that innocence doesn't undo trauma. These are the costs of a false allegation, not just legal costs, but human costs. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate you coming on this journey with us. If you do want to help us, please do comment, rate, and review wherever you listen, and follow us on YouTube. That'd be hugely grateful. This has been Picture the Scene. I am Andrew, and as always, Rachel is with me. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.